Shattering Myths is devoted to those of you who know that there's something dreadfully wrong with the political, religious, media, military, and economic institutions which govern and influence our world. We recognize that they are the problem and not the solution. Therefore, our mission is to look behind the headlines, to know who is perpetrating the tragedies that are besieging our planet. Because based upon this plague of adverse political, religious, academic, media, military, and economic influence, we have at most 15 years until all hell is unleashed, and we experience a complete collapse of the world as we know it. As a result, in our second hour, we're going to engage God on His terms through evidence and reason, since His guidance regarding His covenant provides the only reliable escape. Our phone number for listeners who would like to participate in this discussion is 877-300-7645. This is a Friday, and so on Friday's programs, because we have the pleasure of being able to speak to the foremost expert on Islam in the world, IQ al-Rassooli, in our second hour, we're going to reverse our normal program order and begin in the Torah. We have been talking at length about the scientific, the historic affirmations of the flood these last few weeks, as well as the more important aspect of all of this, that the flood and the ark which guided Noah's family through it is all symbolic of the covenant. And just by way of recap before we begin this morning and consider the location of the ark's grounding, by way of recap, we learned that humankind had become overtly religious, overtly political, and that as a result of becoming political and religious after Adam and Yahowah were expelled from the Garden of Eden, the area from the Black Sea all the way down to the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Mesopotamia, the birthplace of Sumer, of Assyria, and of Babylon, that God just became exasperated and said there is absolutely no way that this is going to work out, that such a high percentage of people would be way too corrupt, way too violent, way too abusive of one another for there to be of any chance that my original goal, which was to form a covenant relationship with those individuals who chose to be part of my family, that just was not going to prevail. And that the growth of religion and politics, of militarism, had to be stopped in its tracks. And so in this area, east of the Garden of Eden, from the Black Sea down to the Tigris and Euphrates River, Yahowah said that He was going to create a flood that would cleanse this corruption from the earth. He then chose one man and his family. He chose this man expressly because of his example within his family. He was upright in his family. He chose this man because this man chose to walk with God. Those were the examples that were given. That is the very epitome of the covenant. If you were to summarize the covenant, it is a family relationship where we walk upright in God's presence. We are then told that Yahowah provided instructions to Noah that Noah chose to respond to, and that Noah acted upon everything that Yahowah said. And that is our path to our own ark to the covenant as well, individually. If we act upon what Yahowah has instructed, then we too are saved the same way that he was saved from a very stormy world, adverse conditions all around us. We then find Yahowah himself saying that indeed all of this is a metaphor for the covenant. He says, I am forming a covenant relationship here with Noah. Then as we begin to read about the history of this event, we find Yahowah telling us that this is a truthful account, which means I'm not telling you a parable here. This is not a legend. Well, God is fully capable and fully appropriate to tell us stories that help illustrate an important aspect of a relationship with Him. He says this is not just a story. It happened just as I am describing it. And then we find proof that He was telling us the truth. He says that it's a welling up of deep ocean waters that would commence the flood. and we find exactly when he said the flood occurred, exactly where we said the flood occurred, the means that caused that to happen. It's the Berkel impact crater. It is perfectly suited and its timing and size to create an event throughout Mesopotamia and up to the Black Sea that would cause this flood to commence. And that crater, now 18 miles in diameter, all of the evidence for it, not only the size, the finding of the crater itself, but all of the telltale signs of the over 1,000-foot tsunami wave that emanated from it, as well as the fact that at the upper regions of where this water reached, that we now have absolute proof that the first civilizations, right where God said they would be along the shores of the Black Sea, are now 500 feet underwater, and that the Black Sea instantly turned from fresh to salt water exactly when the flood is said to have occurred, deluging these religious and political, militaristic, and corrupt communities. So we find every bit of evidence that God was accurate. Even the rainfall that would follow such a traumatic event as an asteroid strike, leading to what ultimately would be what we would call now a nuclear winter, where he says that the mountains themselves were blanketed in snow. Therefore, we have absolute affirmation that this occurred. That leads us next to the last bit of affirmation regarding the historicity of this event. And the proof that it actually occurred is only relevant because if what is considered a myth can be demonstrated through science and history to be shown as accurate, then the testimony of the one providing it should be highly considered. And since his testimony is about the covenant, which is the only means for our salvation, that becomes especially relevant to us individually. So now we're looking for the location of this ark to see if it can be found. And what we read is that the ship, the ark, the Tebah, came to rest in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month on the mountains of Ararat. Now, first of all, by way of affirmation, we did go through the dimensions of the ship and how it is unlike ships that existed at the time. In fact, there's really no examples of a ship existing at that time, but even of subsequent ships, the dimensions are entirely different. But the dimensions are almost identical to, in fact, are identical to both supertankers and battleships, and even the largest aircraft carriers. The most stable vessels in the world today are built on exactly the same dimensions in terms of the height from keel to upper decks, from bow to stern, and in terms of beam. Now, this particular statement does not say that the ship came to rest on the summit of Ararat, which is where the numbskulls who can't seem to read seem to think that it must be. Ararat is a volcanic mountain, and it is part of a range, which is what God calls it here, of the mountains, plural, or the hills and ridges of Ararat. A fellow named Ron Wyatt, and I shared this with you yesterday, did a model of the area around the Lake Van and the mountains of Ararat as they range from the north to northeast of Lake Van, about 75 miles away. And he created a model of the ark and put it into a flooded area around these mountains near where the ark would have been built, at the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where Yahowah tells us that he was. And what he found is that when water flows down and retreats from a hilly or mountainous area, it pushes things away from the summits and the ridges. So it becomes literally impossible for a vessel to be on the summit of a mountain when the waters are receding. And so he said, there's no reason for me to look there. There's ever reason for me to look then away from the summit, but still as part of the mountain range. Now, according to the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew and English lexicon, most every other scholastic tool that I consulted on the subject, analysis of the cuneiform inscriptions reveal that Ararat in Assyrian is Urartu. It is a distinct region in eastern Armenia. It is between the Gishon, which is one of the rivers that Yahowah specifically listed, and Lake Van and Lake Urmia. Lake Van is the location, pinpoints the location where the Garden of Eden was based upon the four rivers, the headwaters of four rivers as Yahowah describes them. And so this is a known place. Now the Eris River, which is the Gishon, forms an arc about 100 miles due north of Lake Van, prior to turning southeast along the far side of what is known now as Mount Ararat itself. This places Mount Ararat, the signature summit of this volcanic range, less than 75 miles north by northeast of the northeasternmost shores of Lake Van. These mountains run north and south, above and perpendicular to the eastern Taurus Mountains, skirting the northeast Iranian and southernmost Armenian borders with Turkey. So that is our geography. There has been one and only one credible account regarding the location of Noah's Ark. It is from a man whose widow I have come to know, whose museum I have been to, whose writings I have read, but who died prior to me beginning this journey through Yahowah's Word. His name is Ron Wyatt. Ron saw an aerial photograph which was circulated from the Turkish military files of a ship-shaped object in the mountains 20 miles south of Mount Ararat. And he decided to invest every spare moment and dime in pursuit of confirming what he had seen. We'll continue his account when Shattering Myths continues after the commercial break. Welcome back. We're beginning to talk about the location of Noah's Ark. The first tip was a photograph taken by a Turkish military plane. Now, the location here, this area of Ararat is, this is no man's land. It's up there where the Kurds live, and of course the Kurds are considered to be subhuman by the Muslim Turks, by the Muslim Iranians, and by the Muslim Iraqis. They are the largest indigenous, racially linked population in the world without a homeland. They are everything that the mythical people called the Palestinians are not. The mythical people of Palestinians have no racial connection of any kind. They have no national connection of any kind. They have no land connection of any kind. They're just a political myth, but the Kurds aren't. But the Kurds live in northern Turkey, northeastern Turkey, and this is a very, very volatile, difficult region to travel to. There's really no flights in and out. There are to get in and out. You're taking your life in your hands. So a Turkish military flight pilot noticed something looked like a ship in the middle of a hilly region and took a picture of it, and that picture became published, and so Ron Wyatt wanted to go visit that area. Now his story, it's a fascinating read. It's detailed in the Discovery volume booklet published by the Wyatt Archaeological Research Foundation. You can find it by going WyattMuseum.com, WYATT Museum.com, or by calling. Here's a telephone number, number, probably still accurate, 931-293-4745. So I'm not going to go through the entire journey of Mr. Wyatt in this case, but it's fascinating. He only has the Discovery volume, but there's a 2-hour video that he has produced called Discovered Noah's Ark. Now, I've read it. I've seen the video. I've been to the museum in Tennessee. I've interviewed Ron Wyatt's widow, Mary Nell Wyatt, and I recommend that those who are fascinated by this kind of thing do the same. I once thought that it would be interesting to do research on the things that are all considered to be myths to find out if there was any affirmation that they were actual events, and so that's kind of what began this process. Now, I've since found so much information in prophecy and just analyzing the words of the Torah and the prophets that this is sort of superfluous from where I am now, but at the time it was a meaningful investigation. Now, the evidence that Ron marshals is more than sufficient to confirm his findings to anyone familiar with Yahowah, and sufficient to prove it beyond the doubt to any skeptic. The more I investigate the charges of his critics, the more I'm convinced that Ron was right and that most of them are just either conniving or jealous. The same can be said of Ron's discovery of Sodom and Gomorrah. The discovery of the Exodus crossing, which I am certain that he found the location there, as well as the location of the real Mount Sinai, which again is something you can affirm for yourself with your own eyes through using Google Maps, as well as the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant, which is a story in and of itself, one of the most magnificent stories I think I have ever personally heard. Someday, I would love to be able to partner with Ron's widow to bring this evidence to the world, but the reality is that the Ark of the Covenant is not going to be seen by the world at large until sometime about 17 or 18 years from now, at which time the two tablets will be held up as a referendum against the prevailing political and religious establishment in the late 2020s, 2029, 2030 period of time. So the thing that I would most like to, of course, examine there is that Yahowah has told us that the original autograph of the Torah is beside the Ark of the Covenant. Wouldn't you love to be able to photograph it and to be able to communicate it from a perfect copy? That would be a marvelous thing to be able to do. Now, mind you, according to what Yahowah said through the prophet Yirmiyahu, in 2033, which is just 20 years from now, upon his return on Yom Kippurim, Yahowah himself is going to give us, each of us, all of his covenant children, a complete and perfectly accurate copy of the Torah, and going to literally make it part of the fabric of our lives so that it is inside of us, literally part of us. So it would be only a short period of time that this discovery would avail us. Now, before we leave this passage, know that the 7th month is the, I can't say it's the most important on Yahowah's calendar. It is certainly the most important relative to coming home, which was the purpose of the, this ark, which was Noah's home during the storms, of it coming to rest and becoming, coming home again in the sense of coming back to earth. It's the 7th month, where the first day of that month is called Teruah, where we are become messengers. Those of us who have focused on Yahowah's Torah guidance and have responded to it are encouraged to share what we have learned. And that is the first day of the 7th month is Teruah, this day to become troubadours for Yah's message, particularly as it relates to his covenant. 10 days after that, we have Yom Kippurim. So it's the 10th day of the 7th month. It's called the Day of Reconciliations. This is an essential day because it is the day that Yahowah specifically says that he's going to return. So Yah's going to return on the Day of Reconciliations in year 6000 Yah. Now, we know when year 0 is, which is when Adam and Chava were booted out of the garden. We know that the flood occurred 1,000 years thereafter. We know that Abraham, in around 1968 BCE, on Mount Moriah, affirmed the covenant with Yahowah, and that exactly 1,000 years thereafter, on exactly the same place, Solomon built the first house or temple on that exact same place. And 1,000 years after that is 33 CE, when Yahushua fulfilled the first 4 Moed Mikre. And that was year 4000 Yah. That's the year that is presented in the opening chapter of Bereshith, where it says that on the 4th day, or the 4th millennia of human existence after being expelled from the garden, the greater light would become visible as a sign of the Moed. The Moed are these 7 annual meetings with Yahowah. And so the coming home is the next day on Yah's calendar. He's going to return to earth on Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah, which therefore 2,000 years from 33 CE is 2033. That would mean it would be on October 2nd of 2033. But it is coming home occurs 5 days thereafter on the Moed of Sukkah, which means shelters or homes. And so it is in the 7th month that shelters takes place on the 15th day of that month. And therefore the timing of this is extremely important. It follows the path. This whole process has followed the path of the 7 Mikre right through Yah's timeline. Now, based upon the lunar month of approximately 29 days, it's actually 29 and a half days, 70 days after Sukkah's celebration, the water flowed away and receded. So on the first day of the 10th month, the summits, this is now Roshé, the tops, the uttermost heights of the mountains became visible. Ra'ah. The fact that God is using summit here and did not use summit relative to the landing location of the ark tells you that he was very clear. It's going to be among the mountains of Ararat, not on the summit of any of these mountains. Now, Yahowah repeats things he wants us to understand and never forget. 40 is the time designated as a completion of a period of testing. For example, I gave you those dates throughout history. If you take the Yobel is the every 50th year. It's 7 times 7 plus 1. The Yobel is patterned off of the Moed, the meeting of Shavuot, which is the promise of 7 that takes place 7 times 7 plus 1 day from the celebration of unyeasted bread, or matzah. And what God is telling us takes place on these Yobel years is that all debts are forgiven, all land is returned, all slaves are freed. And so the Yobel, which is 7 times 7 plus 1, or 50 years, periods of reconciliation and renewal, God tells us that 40 being the number of testing, if you multiply 40 times 50, you get 2,000. So if you look at the date of 3968 BCE, which is when Adam and Chava were booted from the garden, 40 Yobel from that time that they were excluded from the covenant is reaffirmed with mankind through Abraham on Mount Moriah in exactly 2040 Yobel later, which is 1968 BCE. And then exactly 40 Yobel later, on exactly the same spot, Mount Moriah, Yahushua, which is the corporeal, diminished manifestation of Yahowah, fulfills the first four moed: Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shavuot. Right on time. Right in the fourth millennia of human existence, expelled from the garden, with that time clock beginning at that point. And of course, what, my friends, is 40 Yobel from 33 CE? The math is not difficult. 2000 plus 33 is 2033. That is the last Yobel year within the lifetimes of those who witnessed all of the prophetic events that Yahowah described would occur before his return, which included the return of Yisrael, becoming a nation again, which included a world war, which included the advent of terrorism as the ubiquitous tactic of religion around the world. All of these things, including a geometric increase in the size and magnitude of megaseismos, which would be tornadoes, hurricanes, and earthquakes, as well as the tsunamis that go along with some of these events. So we're dealing with Yahowah reinforcing all of this through the combination of his repetitive use of 40 for a time of testing, and of multiples of 7 being the embodiment of his overall plan. So the water flowed away and receded. So on the first day of the 10th month, the summits of the mountains became visible. And then it came to pass, after the completion of 40 days, Noah opened a window of the ark. 40 was the completion of a time of testing. It was over. The window of the ark was opened. Now, in the 8th verse, the universal symbol of Yahowah's spirit, a dove, which is in Hebrew, Yonah. For those familiar with Yonah, it is the name that is corrupted to Jonah, and it does explain the nature of the story of Jonah, if you know what Yonah means, dove, which is the symbol for Yah's spirit. So a dove was sent out. Yahowah's set-apart spirit is sent out from him. It is part of him, set apart and extended, stretched out and dispatched to renew, to restore, to protect, to enlighten, to nurture, to empower, and to serve us. The true story of the man named dove, Yonah, corrupted to Jonah, is not a fish tale, but is instead a stirring depiction of Yah's spirit. Now, if you're interested in it, its prophetic implications are told fairly comprehensively in what is the Pesach chapter of the Good News volume of Yada Yah. It's an interesting read. So here is what God continues to say. We're reading now from Barishit, in the beginning, the first book of the Torah, 8:11. And the dove arrived at that time, at the time of sunset, and a freshly picked olive branch was in her mouth. And Yonah knew that indeed the waters had diminished from the land, from the region. Well, you see that the dove in Yonah is not only a symbol for Yah's set-apart spirit. You also find that with the dove arriving at sunset, not at sunrise, that we find this new beginning. The day begins in the Torah at sunset, not at sunrise. Sunrise is in the middle of the day. Sunset is the beginning and end of a day. The beginning of one, the beginning really of both days, so a day would end just prior to sunset, starting the new day at sundown. And the olive branch is also symbolic of the Spirit. Now, the olive branch is symbolic for the following reasons. The olive tree is the longest-lived tree in that part of the world. Nothing even comes close. The olive tree is capable of living for thousands of years. Number two, the olive, which is the fruit of that tree, is not only the source for olive oil, and as olive oil, which is the symbol of the Spirit's light, of Yahowah's light, because it was the purest form of illumination at night. If you wanted to read at night, you wanted to do work at night, you wanted to do anything at night, you needed one of those olive oil lanterns that became so prolific throughout Israel and the Middle East. It was a pure flame. The olive is also extraordinarily nourishing. Olive oil is a very effective nourishing food. Beyond that, if you have a wound in the ancient world, the most effective salve over a wound to seal the wound from bacteria and to promote skin growth is olive oil. And the olive tree is a tree that was chosen because it can weather a storm. You know, the winds will blow, the olive won't fall over. The fires will blaze, the olive will not be destroyed. It is an extraordinarily hearty, the longest-lived tree, deeply rooted in this particular land that produces an extraordinarily valuable fruit, a fruit that is not only nourishing, but also a fruit that is healing and a fruit that is illuminating. So that is the reason for the olive branch. We will return to Shattering Myths after the commercial break. We will consider why the olive branch was in the dove's mouth as opposed to its talons, and that we will also consider what the water implies also relative to the Spirit. Back in a moment. Back to Shattering Myths. We're considering all of the symbolism in this particular statement. The dove arrived, which would be the set-apart spirit of Yahowah from Yonah. And then you find that it occurred just at the time of sunset, which is the beginning of a new day, that it had a freshly picked olive branch. The olive is symbolic because it's the longest-lived tree, long life, eternal life, firmly rooted in the land of Israel, and that it's established there in the land, and that its fruit is both nourishing, it is healing, and enlightening. It was in her mouth. It was not in her talons. This was the mouth is essential because it's the orifice for breathing and for communicating. The purpose of the Spirit is to impart life to us that is symbolic of breath and of communicating Yah's word to us. And so she isn't in the mode of trying to control, but trying to share. You'll notice that the dove is feminine because the set-apart spirit, which is this metaphor that God is using here to communicate to us, is feminine. The maternal aspect of Yahweh's nature, Yah's maternal light, is the set-apart spirit. And then it goes on to speak of, and so Noah knew. This is Noah Yada. Noah, as we discovered in previous programs, communicates a great deal in Hebrew. Noah not only means trustworthy guide, but Noah is also speaks of being settled, of one who is the beneficiary of a favorable relationship, who is restored and settled in a home that enables him to live prosperously, and is a guide that is both trustworthy and reliable to that place. And now he's this name, which means all of those things, is being associated with one of the most important verbs in Hebrew, yada. That's why the series of books that we've been sharing is called Yada Yah. You can find them at yadayah.com. Yada means to know. It means to know in a relational sense, so as to be familiar with, to acknowledge, to accept, and to ultimately to understand. All of this is designed to help us understand. Just as we are understanding the symbolic message associated with all of these words, that this is an actual event, but laden with all sorts of revealing symbolism, Noah knew this as well. And that he knew that indeed, surely and truly, that the waters had diminished. They had receded from the land, from this region, which means that it had been cleansed. Water is a metaphor for the Spirit as well. And water is a metaphor for two reasons. First, it is from water that life emerges. Yahowah was very clear in his creation account, speaking of the emergence of life from water. Water is without liquid water, there is no capacity for life, and Yahowah affirms this in his creation account. So it is the source of life. If you look at our physical nature, we are comprised of more water than anything else, although we are a carbon-based life form, which is interesting, and the carbon has the molecular number of 6, which is the number of man, according to Yah's testimony, conceived on the 6th day. Our most substantive aspect of our mortal physical existence is water. But also water has a unique property in that it is the universal solvent. We wash our hands under water because water cleanses. Water cleanses the land, leaching it of pollutants and of salt. Water is literally the universal solvent, and it is the source of life. If you don't have water, you aren't going to grow anything. It's interesting. We were talking during the commercial break, but that Israel had been salted by the Romans in 133 CE, a Yovel year, by the way, and they salted the land to make it uninhabitable. And what happened when the Muslims came through and booted the Byzantine Christians out of the land, and also Jews, they were unable to live there. There wasn't enough water. There wasn't, and the water that was there was in the Dead Sea, and therefore useless, and the land itself had been salted. So it was only after the Holocaust, when Jews were allowed to return to Israel, that they conceived ways to water the land, to leach it of its salts, and to make it productive and to flower again. But all of that required water.